Hello and welcome to Evidence for Change podcast. This podcast is for pharma-patient engagement leaders who don't have a shortage of evidence, but still struggle to turn that evidence into consistent, scalable impact. Across pharma, we know patient engagement is a strategic imperative. The real question is whether it can be done well, globally, sustainably, and in a way that genuinely improves patient outcomes.
Yeah, so today we've got an interesting topic. We're really reframing the question around global. It comes up a lot. And the question we get asked is, can you do it? And, we're here to say that you can. And we're going to dive deep into that and looking at how they can fail and really go to something that's a bit more useful. And it's how do you successfully design and roll out these global patient programs? And if so, how do you do that? We're going to get into the nuts and bolts and, I think draw on some of the evidence of what we've seen over the past 20 years around making these programs a success.
Absolutely. And our guest for today's podcast is Matt Colwell from Chiesi. Matt has a deep experience designing and executing multi-market patient programs and, importantly, helping organizations move from pilots to global capability. Matt, it's great to have you with us. Why don't we kick things off? Could you tell us a little bit about your background and your interest in patient engagement?
Thanks, Charles, and thanks, Johnny. Nice to see you again. I've been in the biopharma industry for the past 20 years or so, and I've spent my time in many different organizations from clinical stage biotech, commercial stage biotech, mid and large size pharma across the US and in global roles. One of the things that is kind of near and dear to my heart is, helping patients achieve better outcomes. And I know that sounds maybe a little bit cliche and what you might hear when you're talking to someone in the industry. But I think it's something that's still very challenging to do, especially on a global scale. And I'm proud to say that I've been a part of some really great experiences where we found success in helping improve patient outcomes. Part of finding success is that I was also part of some experiences where we made some failures. And I think, learning from those failures and applying them forward is what helps us continue to grow and to do better. So I'm happy to share some of my experience with you today.
Awesome. Thanks, Matt. So why don't we set the scene? We're talking about patient engagement from a global standpoint. Given the variety, given the different jurisdictions, the different attitudes, is global success in patient engagement actually possible?
It is. I think what you have to remember is if you want to develop a patient engagement solution that is going to ultimately be successful, you actually have to get buy-in from senior leadership right from the start. So if you're talking about an organization that's a global organization with multiple affiliates across a number of different geographic regions, you have to get a mandate from the top, from the chief commercial officer, from the chief executive officer, that patient engagement and developing patient engagement solutions globally is an important priority. It's part of the annual strategic imperatives, if you will. If you can't get buy-in from that top level, it's going to be really hard to be successful, because to develop a program of any type of global scale, whether it's patient engagement or a different type of commercial program or medical program, you need a lot of resources. You need a lot of financial resources. You need a lot of human resources. And you need a lot of choreography and coordination across regions. And you're not going to get that unless you have direction from the top saying, this is important to us and it's something we have to execute globally.
Yeah, I'd agree with what Matt's saying. And I think quite often that can be the case, but quite often it's not. It might be driven at a brand level, but it really cuts across, commercial, medical. And that's why you do really need that sort of leadership putting a stake in the ground to say, this is going to be a key part of the strategy. And we want to be best in class globally. And what's interesting, I think, is the opportunity with global is, like Matt said, it does take a lot of resources. And if you get global and local aligned around the strategy and the execution, you can combine those resources to create a best in class solution that's consistent, that is leading, and that can evolve with the local and the global actors playing their part through that evolution in concert. So I think there's lots of benefits of global that probably get lost because you don't get that buy-in that Matt's talking about and you don't get that leadership. And actually, if you get a really nice coordinated approach throughout the organization, you will have the biggest impact, importantly for the patient at the end, but even within the organization.
So yeah, executive level buy-in from top down to ensure that everyone's on the same page, but naturally you're once you've got that agreement from the executive level, you then need to develop distinct programs for each region, correct?
Well, I mean, maybe I can start, Matt. You've got lots of experience in this. I think The first thing is to not try and start with a solution in mind. It's just try and, start with a good, again, the strategic alignment. Where does it fit? How can it support strategy? And that will inform what are the problems we're trying to solve with the program. And ultimately that distills down to where in the journey and what are the key behaviors that we really want to have an impact on. And I think what that then does, once you start to unpick the problem, you can then start to look at the evidence around what's driving that behavioral issue that's leading to a suboptimal outcome. And the exciting piece of all of this is when we've done global research around these behavioral challenges and the underlying drivers of those challenges, is actually it's remarkably consistent market to market. The patient challenges, the drivers of 80 to 90% of them are consistent. And we've shown that in big quantitative studies where we've been working with partners in the areas atrial fibrillation. We did a multi-market study, quantitative, around the drivers of non-adherence in that therapy area. 6 out of the 7 were the same. With that evidence base, it allowed us to sort of, I suppose, win the hearts and the heads of the organization to say, actually, we should be developing something that's consistently effective in addressing that challenge. We also did something similar in immunology. That was the ALIGN study. The AbbVie commissioned a significant piece of research, 7,000 patients, 20 or so markets, looking at predictors of non-adherence across different TAs within immunology, or different indications within immunology. Again, really consistent. And that understanding and that buy-in enables you to develop a behavioral frame that can then move to a solution. But maybe I'll pass that to Matt, maybe that question and that challenge around global design.
Yeah, I mean, I think you hit on a couple of important points there. I think you said something like, don't start with a solution in mind. I think I agree with that in terms of the tactical solution. I think what I think can help drive success is to have a vision. What's the ideal outcome? What's the outcome? Oh, well, we want to deliver a program that drives X% improvement in adherence, or it drives X% improvement in functional outcomes, or something like that. And then you ask the question, well, do we want to do that across all of our markets, or do we want that to be regional, or whatever? And I think once you get to the point where you say, no, for a particular asset in our portfolio, we want to make sure that patients who are treated with that medicine, if they get access to that medicine and get access to a patient program to help them navigate their journey while managing their disease and the medicine, we want them all to have a similar outcome. Okay, great. How do we do that? And I think that kind of a conversation is very similar to a conversation that a company would have about saying, hey, we have an asset in development and we want to try to put it through clinical trials and seek an indication and commercialize that, because we want to help treat patients with this asset and help them do better. So I think it's similar thought process and conversations about putting together some kind of a global program like that. And so again, I think it's elevating the objective to be higher than, oh, we want to do a patient program. No, we want to improve patient outcomes, or we want to improve outcomes of those people living with this disease. Well, how do we do that? And then you start there, and then you start building, okay, what's the kind of global scaled approach that we need to do there? And what can we globalize from a central perspective? And what can't we do? Because it makes a lot of sense why we can't do it from a geographical perspective or a stakeholder perspective.
That's really interesting, actually, because you often think that, well, we're so different across the globe that you would need to localize early. But the message that I'm hearing is that, the requirement is top down, global first. If you localize too early, you've missed the boat, because fundamentally behaviors are similar across regions. And you're trying to go after that particular behavior, not necessarily like a local change.
The short answer there is yes. I think that's the right approach. Often because when you look at companies that are, say, at least $5 to $10 billion in annual sales, typically what you have is you'll have a US region or affiliate that is pretty well resourced. And then you'll have a global organization that is trying to support a number of affiliates. Typically, you'll have your European affiliates, they're fairly well resourced. But then you have another 15 to 20 affiliates around the world that have much less resource. So you do need to find a way to bring these patient programs to life. And the way to do that is you want to try to create some economies of scale, right? So you want to say, okay, if we're going to create a global program, and we want this global program to be applicable and localized across affiliates, especially those affiliates where they may be resource constrained, we at least need to create some sort of central foundation that we can build part of it so they don't have to expend resources there, so that they can save their limited resources to localize that. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Are there like 3 core principles that need to be considered when you're looking at a successful global program? You mentioned behavior, outcomes, anything else that, are core tenets of a successful global program, Johnny?
Yeah, I mean, I can jump in to that. I think, yes, I think the behavioral, clearly alignment to strategy, right? There has to be direct line of sight. And I think, Matt, you touched on just clarity on outcomes. And that really is important because that informs everything, right? In terms of where's the focus of the design, where should resources be concentrated, and there needs to be good, honest discussions about that, because quite often you'll get different stakeholders wanting different things. So really often we'll just set up really clear project charters about what this solution is going to be delivering, and that keeps everyone clear and focused. And because what quite often these projects take a while to sort of work through the system. They can be, the setup for a global program can be sort of 6 to 9 months, and you're getting into local execution. That will then focus the organization on that piece, and we need to have something to refer back to at all times. So I think clarity around alignment to strategy, alignment. The next piece is just aligning around the behavioral approach, because again, that wins the hearts and minds of the internal stakeholders and the external stakeholders of that. The design we're bringing to market has a foundation of evidence that is maybe it's being applied in an innovative way, but it should instill confidence that we're doing the right thing for patients that's going to work. I think, good operational execution is great, but I think, the third bit there is really just getting the energy and the focus within the organization, within the pharmaceutical company, to execute this right out into the field, because that has to be there to make these solutions stick. From my perspective, those are the 3 pieces. Matt, hand it to
Yeah,
you.
I mean, no, I think, I agree. And I would just talk a little bit more about how you contextualize behavioral approach, right? So for me, I think what I'm hearing the behavioral approach is almost like the working principle of the program. What I'm making it up, but what are the 5 tenets that the program has to do, right? And so you develop an approach that says, well, we have to have a human intervention. So we have to have some sort of, person that's engaging with the person who's living with the disease to help them manage their disease education and help them manage how to think about their treatment. That's a guiding principle. We have to have human intervention as an example. Another example is we need to have some sort of digital electronic, interface or tool or whatever that helps, so on and so forth. So I think you have to have alignment around what are the core principles of the behavioral approach or the behavioral program. Because when you get alignment around that, it's based on you basically creating some kind of a business case that you communicate to, senior leadership that says, hey, we want to improve outcomes for patients by X. And we think to do that, we have this program, and we have evidence that supports that if we deliver this program with these 5 core tenets, we think we can improve patients' outcomes by X. And then, of course, the question comes, well, what resources are going to be required to do that globally? And as in all business cases, there's also the question, well, how does that impact, downstream, right? So once you've sold the narrative there and you've convinced leadership, then the next element is to say, we're going to take that to the regions or to the affiliates, and we're going to give them 60% of it, because we know it would be a fool's errand to give them 100%. Because there are so many elements with these complex global programs that, from a data privacy perspective or from an infrastructure perspective or an IT perspective or technology, what works in one affiliate or what works in one region may not work in another. And so if you just try to force fit a globally designed central solution, you're going to fail.
Yeah.
Right. So you have to say, we're going to give you 60% of it. And as long as you find a way to localize the remaining 40%, but you keep true to the guiding principles, because the guiding principles are what we sold leadership that says, if you develop a program and you intervene that way, it's going to drive this outcome, which will then drive this impact on the patient and their lives, the business, and so on, so that we can do it again for the next drug that gets approved, for the next disease that comes around.
Yeah, agree. And I think, I think part of those organizational principles is we're going to measure this thing, because
Right.
consistently.
Right.
And I think that we're really interesting projects in that area, but consistent measurement allows for all sorts of opportunities, demonstrate impact on patients. Also, where you're not having the impact you thought you should or you could, that then the impact we can use to communicate to stakeholders internally, externally, or that'll drive program adoption and maintain investment. It'll also the areas where maybe it's not performing, that's an opportunity for global to keep adding value, because global can look at these areas of suboptimal performance or gaps and go, hey, actually, we're seeing this consistently across markets. Why don't we do the heavy lift and fill that gap? It could be a specific behavioral module. It could be something, that we're seeing beyond 6 months, our content's flagging, right? So we need to maybe evolve our content strategy beyond 6 months because people are moving from illness to wellness. We're seeing that play out in the lowering of engagement. Just really good, consistent measurement. And it sounds sort of simple, but it's amazing how many of these global programs, they don't see it through to that level. And they don't have a global publication strategy, or they don't invest in that. But the ones that do really, they see all of those benefits. And one of them is just, they can really build this with those outcomes and the better patient experience, long-term differentiation in the market, which helps
Well,
with what's planning.
yeah, and to your point, I think the part about measurement and measuring the outcomes is often overlooked or underappreciated. I don't think that. I mean, that's for anything, Johnny. It's not just for these patient programs. It's for any kind of program that a company wants to implement, because that's usually the last step, and all of the energy is spent up front. Where I do see working metrics and KPIs in to help drive continuous process improvement is when you're working with colleagues in organizations, or when you're working at organizations that have an innovation mindset built in to everything that they do.
Yeah.
And when there's a lot of literature out there on innovation and how to do it. And one of the critical elements of innovation is measurement and learning from what you measured so that you can improve. We're measuring that this intervention isn't working. Guess what? We're not going to bother improving anymore. We're going to get rid of it and we're going to try something new. Right.
Yeah.
So I think I've worked at a few different organizations in my career, and I've worked at a couple where the innovation mindset was really driven into the ethos of how the entire organization operated. And so it was a lot easier to innovate there and to measure and to show outcomes and then get more investment to do something the next year.
Yeah.
Whereas I've worked at another organization or two where, that wasn't really built into the mindset. And so it was much more difficult to, first of all, communicate that you could come up with an innovative patient program and then show results, because that just wasn't in the ethos of the corporation.
Yeah.
So that getting that feedback, measuring it, getting that feedback endorses the further rollout of a global program to other regions, I'm sure. I mean, so surely there is occasionally some hesitancy around adopting a program in certain regions, and you'd have to demonstrate the proof or provide the evidence that it does work, right? I mean, Johnny, I'm sure you've come across this a few times.
Sometimes you got to fight for it, right? Like with all of that all of that build up and setting the scene and the evidence. Matt can tell us. I was in the room actually. I saw Matt having to fight for the design where it was really well validated. The data was there. Strategically, it all made sense. There was good leadership from the top, but you still have to be up for the challenge, right, Matt? I mean,
everything strategy, if you look at literature on strategy, on the idea of strategy is about making choices. And I think there's a quote out there: strategy is about making choices in a world with limited resources. So you can hire the best external partner to build an amazing global program that can be executable by finding the right mix of, the globalized component of it and then what gets localized. At the end of the day, though, people or affiliates or teams still have to find investment to invest in that to build it out. And so I worked at an organization where I was in a global role, and we were trying to roll out a global patient program. And the people that were in the affiliates, who would be the owners of this program, in general, they believed in it. They thought it was the right program and that it could generate outcomes. But they needed to then go back and talk to their GMs or their directors of commercial. And they needed to ask those people for funding in the next fiscal cycle to then fund the program. And so they would constantly ask, well, do you have any proof that it's worked in the other affiliates? What impact did it have in that country over there by them investing what you're asking for, and did it have an impact, right? And that's hard to do when you're trying to roll out a program maybe simultaneously across markets, because you don't have case studies internally that you can say, oh yeah, we rolled it out in this market 2 years ago and wow, look at the impact, right? So there has to be a little bit of a well, there has to be a rigorous process to develop the program that's evidence-based. And then you have to get people to buy in that, this is what's right for the patient, it's what's right for the organization. Because at the end of the day, everybody's competing for the same pot of unlimited resources, right? And so it's how do you get other people to believe that, okay, I'll spend X amount of dollars in my budget for next year to build out this program, knowing that I may not see, impact to the organization for another couple of years, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It's difficult. Yeah. With this, there's this whole, show us the evidence, but at some point you've got to build it with evidence, but at some point you've got to get people to take the step. And that exact program design has never been really, it's never been implemented in your market with your treatment. But yeah, so there's a few battles to be won to get the local execution. But if you take them on the journey, and I think that's an important part of the process, right? Setting this up from the beginning so there's good market representation throughout the whole process, the co-design process, global patient participation. Your research involves global patients, global groups, advocacy. All of that's investment and all of that's complexity, but it's worth it to get good alignment around the program design so you can get the kind of 80-20 rule where you get a consistent behavioral approach and good adoption of what's produced globally and measurement.
Yeah. And I think finding the right internal champions that are more commercially oriented is essential, right? Because again, making it resonate with them that if we deliver this program and it drives certain outcomes for patients, this will help us be differentiated, right? So this will help us differentiate the brand that you're promoting, or this will help us differentiate the organization because, in our category, because we want to be the organization that delivers the superior patient experience, right? So again, helping connect the dots between if we deliver this global program and allow it to be localized across affiliates, this is the impact it'll have on the patient, which then translates to the impact on the organization, which then helps you be more strongly differentiated against competitors. That connecting those dots are what's essential to building that momentum and that critical mass.
Yeah. Yeah. Completely when you think about a lot of these treatments coming to market, the clinical difference is a lot of them it's really close, right? So it's what other value can you add to the patient around that? And in some respects, the quicker you can bring that to market and demonstrate it, you really can, you can execute quite a unique strategy that will drive differentiation because you're adding more value and you're capturing it and you're communicating it.
And to build on that, Johnny, and you and I were a part of a program experience like this. One of the other false beliefs, I think, is that you want to deliver a patient program globally. So, that's going to be really expensive and hard to do because, you want to do a one size fits all, or you'll have people that say, well, a one size fits all doesn't work because, not everyone is the same, right? But as you know, Johnny, from a previous experience, we developed a program that was tailored by patient segment, if you will, right? And so what we were able to prove was that, hey, the majority of these patients across multiple indications in multiple disease areas, they're very similar, regardless of the disease that they have. And if you segment them, if you will, based on their attitudes and beliefs that are impacted by them living with their disease and the burden it puts on them, actually, some of them really need a lot of help and a lot of intervention. So that's where you drive and deliver the program. But others, very, very light, minimal touch. So from a program design perspective, that allows you to tailor your investment and your resource allocation as well as your intervention, right? Some
Yeah.
people only need just a little bit of a nudge. And that, if you give them any more than that, you're actually driving them away. Whereas other people need a lot more. So again, being able to serve up that concept to leadership saying, hey, we don't have to invest the same amount across all the patients that engage with this program. It can be different because patients actually don't want the same thing.
Yeah.
Patients
Yeah.
are
Yeah.
different.
Yeah. It's like it's a global program, but actually, no, it's an individual solution.
That's right.
That's what it is. And I think what's great, right, is with where the emerging use of technology and LLMs is it actually means that you can deliver this level of personalization at scale that you couldn't, that you couldn't really in the past, or you could, but the level of sophistication now with deploying some of this technology means that, and there's a bit to work through, and that's where global should be playing. How do you deploy? And some of the clients we work with, that's where we're focusing on global, really being able to provide that platform approach. How do you deploy this technology that local can tap into, that can deliver a whole new individual patient experience that a local market, it would be very difficult for them to really set that up. All sorts of reasons, the use of technology, compliance, but global can play there, and companies are. But it's this the new technology of how you can have a very tailored conversation that can be supporting in detail, in real time, at depth with the individual, based on feedback, based on signals, based on integrations is fantastic. And that's the opportunity for global, is to really design that capability for local markets to implement. And a global program can do that. Local markets would struggle to do that at the local market level.
That's right.
I'm curious, given the complexity of these programs, what the role of publishing the evidence that comes up from a program or previous programs has on influencing the adoption or driving further success of the program. Johnny, do you have any examples from your organization where evidence was published to support things moving
Yeah, I
forward?
mean, I can just probably firsthand. So we design programs, but also run them in the markets. And for 5 years, basically the nurse navigator coaches would go into the markets and would communicate the program to the clinicians. For 5 years, we used the publication as basically that was here's the why behind the program. And so that was, across specialist types, we would be continually refreshing that publication update. And really, if you like, that was kind of, in terms of the best detail aid when it comes to patient engagement, that's a publication that shows here's what the outcome, and then, you can have interesting narrative around that, around what's driving that. And that would be at the congresses, that would be used in reminding clinicians around here's the added value around the treatment. So that's like firsthand, how was this used? That's in the field. But maybe you can just talk about, I suppose, within pharma, what the challenges around this whole publication debate, because for some it's just there's not an appetite, but for others who kind of see the opportunity, they commit to it early. So I'm interested in your thoughts around why that is.
Well, I think when I think back about some of the successful experiences I've had with patient programs and really seeing them succeed at scale on a global level, again, it goes back to getting everyone aligned from a senior level and understanding that this is a differentiating element for the organization, either for the brand or the franchise or the organization. And when you start talking about it in those terms, then you start to say, okay, so if this is a differentiating element, what would we do to make it differentiating? And what would we do then to communicate the differentiation? And that's where a publication strategy comes in, right? So you say, well, we want to publish this differentiating patient program. Okay, so if we're going to publish it, what do we want to use the publications for? Well, perhaps we want to use it in discussions with healthcare assessment authorities, or to bring to the negotiating table when we're saying why they should consider our drug on formulary versus, another agent that's in the class. And I think if you have a good evidence-based publication that shows rigor and robustness in how you design the patient program, how you collect the data to show that patients in the program did better than patients not in the program, and it met sort of from a publication perspective, then that could be used as a vehicle to communicate why a payer, for example, or a purchasing organization, for example, might want to be more open to negotiating with you on carrying your drug on formulary versus a competitor that doesn't have a program. The publication can also be used, with your field teams when calling on physicians and saying, hey, have you seen this latest publication where our product X that we're talking to you about, well, patients on our product X who also are in this patient program, they do better than just on product X alone. Let me show you the outcomes. Let me show you the data. Now you've got the physician thinking, especially in categories where a lot of the drugs these days can be me too, or with incremental improvement. Now you've got the physician thinking, okay, so maybe the patient will do better if I'm in your drug, And then I think also too, just with patient advocacy groups, communicating how the organization is really invested in improving patient outcomes. And so being able to publish how a big program like this can have a positive impact on patients' lives, I think that's helpful.
Yeah. Yeah, Matt, I think you touched on a really good point that the publication strategy throughout the project is important. So even the first bit around quantifying the need and the issue. I mean, we did a really interesting project in breast cancer where we were, before we even launched the program, we established the need, right? And it was really the challenge around adherence. And it's not even it's not a brand issue, it's a category issue. So it was really to it wasn't, and I think that sometimes, they don't really want to talk about the problem because they think, oh, well, that's linked to the product. Most clinicians know it's a category issue we're talking about. And then if you can quantify and publish the challenge, then when you come in with a solution, you've got more of an open door because you've actually built the need for the solution. And you've actually got time through the program development to do that sort of publication. It takes a little bit more planning, but I think that quite often is missed, is build the need through publication. So then when you come in with a solution, there's probably a much more receptive audience for it, and you've laid that groundwork.
The one point I want to make on the publication strategy as a watch out is if you're going to develop a publication strategy around a global program, and that publication strategy is predicated on, publishing outcomes that a global program has on patients across multiple geographies. You have to make sure that how the program is executed in multiple geographies is executed closely enough
Yeah.
so that you don't introduce too much heterogeneity in the outcomes that it makes it difficult to draw a conclusion that can stand up to rigor, if that makes sense.
Yeah, agree.
And that's where I've seen some pushback in previous examples in my career where the global organization doesn't believe, rightly or wrongly, that a global program can be implemented in somewhat of a uniform way unless they push down a centrally designed program, right? And again, that's where I go back to, hey, look, if we've got a mandate from the leadership that it has to have these 5 guiding principles, for example, then we need to make sure we get commercial, medical affairs, market access, patient engagement. We need to get everybody aligned that this is the way we're going to do this, because at the end of the day, we want to show great outcomes and we want to be able to publish that. So we have to make sure we always have these, guiding principles as our North Star for how we're going to localize this global blueprint.
Yeah, agree.
Fantastic. And this has been, from my perspective, really interesting because I work in the clinical research field. Johnny and I spoke on the previous episode about, how my remit really is up until the point of a drug getting market authorization. And you kind of think, oh, it just goes off into the ether and then, doctors are going to prescribe it and that's it. But it's not quite that simple. So the whole concept of rolling out a patient engagement program is really interesting to me. And I think this has been very insightful discussion. So thanks, Matt, and of course, Johnny. But why don't we bring this home? I think ultimately the message here is that you can successfully design and roll out global patient engagement solutions. But ultimately, there are a few things that need to be thought about. What are the behavior you're trying to change? How are you going to measure it? What are the outcomes you need? What data are you collecting? Are you publishing? Are you getting, stakeholder engagement correct? And then are you localizing correct appropriately from a global program? But if there's one thing that you want to drive home the message, Matt and Johnny as well, about global patient engagement programs, what would it be?
Johnny, do you want to?
No, you're the guest, Matt.
I think the one thing I would want to drive home is if you want to do something like this, you need to find a way to connect the dots, and not only make it about why this is going to be amazingly great for the patient and how it's going to improve, outcomes XYZ. You also need to then connect that to, but how is that going to impact the organization? So that, because just like with clinical trial design and clinical development, right? You're as an organization, you're making bets on which drugs to push through clinical development based on which ones might have the strongest chance of bringing profit back into the organization so that you can do it all over again, right? So you need to make sure that in a pharma company and a biotech company with limited resources, you make a very strong case for why investing in a patient program like this is the right thing to do, because it will take some resources in the short term, but it will help provide resources in the long term to fund future projects and investments.
Yeah, I think connecting the dots takes some time, right? And I think it starts with you got to understand how, clear alignment with the strategy. And I think really it's, it is about making choices, and there needs to be a business case for doing this, right? And we can, in that business case, should be the outcomes on the patients first and foremost, that we are delivering on the outcomes, we're enhancing those outcomes for a better patient experience, better quality of life. They will be specific to a therapy area, and you're meeting an unmet need. That's the first part of that business case. But it should be, from then on, we should be looking at what is the impact on the organization. We like to think these solutions need to be sustainable. They should be delivering for the patient. They should be delivering for the wider community, and they should be delivering for the organization. So you can make a long-term commitments. Quantifying that business case and that impact up front very early on is important, because that guides everything, the resources that should be put to this project to make it work, and it will guide alignment, and it'll guide clarity through the organization. So yeah.
Fantastic. So I suppose in summary, the evidence is clear, global patient engagement can work, but the real question is whether organizations are willing to design for it appropriately.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah. And thanks, Matt, for being part of the show.
No, thanks, Johnny. I really appreciate it. And Charles, it was a pleasure.
It's been great tapping into all your experience. You've had some really unique roles in developing and delivering these, and successfully doing so. And it's been great to tap into that. So really appreciate it.
Pleasure was mine.
Cool.
Thanks, both.